They did not say her name when they gave her away. Just called her the girl with the sharp tongue and pushed her forward like she was nothing but a burden wrapped in old cloth and silence. Miriam didn't cry. Crying had long been punished. Long been seen as weakness by the same mouths that taught her to fear her own voice. The wind was dry that morning, carried the scent of dust, cattle, and coming winter. Her boots barely fit, scuffed, too small, heels worn to bone, but she stood still, fists clenched tight, eyes dry, spine straight like the ridge of a bare tree after the last leaves had fallen. No one held her hand. No one looked back. Her uncle, Reuben Clark, bartered like he was selling a wagon wheel or worn-out mule. "She eats too much," he said, "talks too much, won't marry, won't listen." He didn't mention her father had died 2 winters ago, lungs drowned from working the frozen soil, or that her mother had burned up with fever before spring ever thawed. He didn't say that Miriam had kept the fire going herself, had patched her own sleeves, had wept silently into soup too thin to feed a body. No, all he said was, "She's trouble." The Lakota riders stood quiet, a small band, just passing through, leather worn, horses lean, eyes watchful like hawks scanning the horizon. They said little. That was their way. Let the earth speak, not the tongue. But one man stepped forward. He was tall, not wide, sinew, not swagger. He moved like rivers, slow, steady, unbothered. A long scar curved beneath his jaw like a crescent moon or a forgotten path. He didn't ask her name either. But he didn't look at her like a problem. He didn't laugh or spit or inspect her teeth like they'd done at market years ago when they tried to trade a girl with freckles for a sack of flour and a jug of molasses. He just watched her, like he was measuring something deeper than weight, something that couldn't be weighed in coin or cattle. They called him Tahu. She would learn later it meant daylight, though his face held more dusk than dawn. Still, he nodded once to her uncle. Silent, sure. Then, from his belt, he pulled a single knife, its hilt beaded in blue and white, old and worn like it had stories to tell, and handed it over. That was all. A knife. For a girl. No one asked if she wanted this. No one asked if she had dreams, if she feared the night, if she even knew where she was going. But Miriam followed, because what else could she do? Sleep another winter in the barn, listening to hogs breathe warmer than her own kin? Be blamed again for taking too much food, too much space, too much life? So she walked. Her feet sank in dry earth, each step slower than the last. But she never looked back. She knew if she turned, the door would already be shut, locked, forgotten. That's what they were good at, forgetting. They'd forgotten her birthday 3 years in a row. Forgotten she could read. Forgotten she knew how to fix a fence better than Reuben's own boys. Forgotten she wasn't a dog, though sometimes they'd kicked her like one. The trail was long, quiet. Tahu said nothing, not even when her breath grew ragged, not when she tripped once on a root and scraped her knee open. By dusk, the camp came into view, tents like skin-colored wings against the earth, smoke curling from fires, children laughing somewhere behind the hides, a woman pounding maize, a man singing low. This world did not know her. She didn't know if it wanted to. But when Tahu handed her a blanket, not tossed at her, not thrown, but handed, careful and slow, as if he didn't want to frighten her, her hands trembled. Not from cold, from disbelief. He placed a bowl of hot stew in front of her. It smelled of sage and marrow and something she hadn't known in years, care. Her stomach twisted. She flinched when he moved near, not because he scared her, but because she had been taught to fear everyone. Every hand meant hunger. Every voice meant hurt. Every quiet moment was just a trap waiting to snap shut. Tahu noticed, but he didn't force her. He didn't touch her. Instead, he knelt beside the fire, picked up a piece of wood and began to carve. Slow, methodical, a man with time and patience. A man not claiming, not owning, just present. That night, beneath the hide-covered shelter, Miriam lay awake on a mat of furs. The stars stared down through holes in the roof. Her hands curled under her chin, body tense like it always had been, ready for the slap, the grab, the whispered threat. But it didn't come. Only the rustle of wind through pine, the occasional pop of firewood, the slow, steady breath of a man who hadn't said one word to her. And yet made her feel less afraid. She blinked at the ceiling. Why hadn't he touched her? Why hadn't he claimed what had been traded to him? That word echoed bitter in her chest. Traded, like livestock, like sugar, like shame. And yet, here she was, wrapped in a stranger's blanket, belly warm with stew, and heart thudding from something far more terrifying than pain. The possibility of kindness. In the days that followed, Tahu said little, and that silence, strangely, became a comfort. He did not bark orders or ask her to serve. He did not watch her like a man watches something he owns. He simply moved through the world with the kind of grace that comes from knowing how not to disturb what is already hurting. Miriam rose each morning before the sun cracked the sky, instinct still whispering in her ear, "Work before you're told, or they'll say you're lazy." She folded the furs, swept around the fire, cleaned the pot though it was not hers to clean. But Tahu never stopped her, never thanked her either. He simply watched, quiet and calm, as he sat near the horses, sharpening his blade with slow, deliberate strokes. He did not praise her, yet she never felt unseen. His silence didn't feel like distance, it felt like space. Space to breathe, space to heal, space to learn who she might be if no one told her what she was. By the third morning, her steps were less cautious. She wandered to the edge of camp, not far enough to offend, but enough to feel the wind in her hair. She stood beneath a juniper tree and closed her eyes. For a moment, the world did not weigh so heavy. 2 Lakota women passed her, one older with lines like riverbeds across her face, the other younger, her braids black as crow wings. They didn't scowl, didn't whisper. The younger one handed Miriam a strip of dried meat with a nod. And Miriam's hands trembled as she accepted it. She had not eaten alongside women without being reminded she was less than in years. That afternoon, she sat with them by the grinding stones. She said nothing at first, only watched. The women laughed, traded gentle insults, passed a gourd of cool water between them. Miriam copied their movements, awkward and unsure, until her hands found the rhythm. When she dropped the pestle and it clattered loudly, she flinched out of habit, shoulders tight, eyes bracing for the slap. But the women only laughed, not unkindly. The older one patted her hand. The younger one handed her a smoother stone. No anger, no mockery, just patience. Later, she looked across the camp and found Tahu watching. Not possessive, not proud, just present. That night, she returned to the fire he'd built. There, on the blanket she'd slept on, lay a wooden carving, small, simple, a bird, its wings tucked but eyes sharp. A hawk. Miriam picked it up with reverence. The grain of the wood was soft, the edges sanded with care. She turned it over in her palm like a question. Tahu said nothing. He only poked the fire gently, coaxing the flame as if tending to something fragile. Like her, she kept the carving beside her furs that night, held it under her hand like a talisman, a promise carved in silence. The next day, her voice came, not loud, not bold, but there, a soft thank you when the younger woman, her name was Waka, showed her how to twist sinew into thread. A small laugh when a boy chased chickens through the camp and tripped over his own feet. She felt it like a crack in a frozen river, the beginning of thaw. Tahu continued to teach without teaching. He would leave things where she could find them, a strip of leather and a needle, a feather tucked near her firewood, an extra bowl of stew. Each gesture was small, but they stacked like stones until they formed something solid, trust. One afternoon, he motioned for her to join him by the river. She hesitated, then followed. He said nothing as he showed her how to lay a snare for rabbits, how to read prints in the mud. When she mimicked him, fumbling, he didn't laugh. He simply reset the snare and let her try again. When the rabbit was caught the next day, he didn't take credit. He placed it by her fire, let her cook it, and sat beside her when she did, eating in quiet respect. By the end of the moon's cycle, Miriam no longer flinched when spoken to. She laughed more, sang softly with the children when they pounded the ground to the rhythm of the drums. She wove her own cord and began to stitch beads, not well, not yet, but enough. One evening, as the sky spilled gold across the plains, she sat beside Tahu again. She held the hawk carving, thumb tracing the lines. "Why a hawk?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. He rarely did. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, full of wind and time. "Hawks do not ask to be caged," he said, "but they come back if treated well." Her throat tightened. For the first time in her life, someone had spoken of her not as a mouth to feed, or a duty, or a shame, but as something wild and worthy. That night, she braided her hair like the other women. Not because she wanted to disappear into their image, but because she felt she belonged to something now. Not as a guest, not as a prize, not even as a wife. As herself. Miriam still kept the hawk by her bedding. Still woke early, still worked hard. But now, the work did not feel like punishment. It felt like participation. The land began to greet her, soft earth beneath her soles. Wind tugging her shawl like an old friend. The fire crackling like laughter instead of warning. And when Tahu returned from a hunt, limping slightly from a scrape on his leg, she was the one who washed the wound and bound it tight. "You should have told me," she said, voice full of worry. He only shrugged. "You helped me," he replied, as if that explained everything. And somehow, it did. The fire was high that night. Voices danced with the smoke, and drums beat like distant thunder rolling across the open sky. Miriam stood at the edge of the circle, a shawl of crimson and rabbit fur around her shoulders, her braids lined with shells that whispered with each step she took. She had laughed with the children. She had danced not to please, but because her bones remembered joy. And for the first time in her life, her body belonged to her. But the past has a way of arriving just when the soul is starting to settle. He came on horseback, a white man, red beard, cold eyes, and a coat that looked too clean for a road that honest. He sat too tall in the saddle, back straight like pride had made him stiff, not strength. Behind him, a mule heavy with goods, pelts, flour, cheap metal trinkets. The people greeted him with nods, wary but polite. Trade was trade, but Miriam felt it before he even opened his mouth. A stone dropped in her stomach. Old and familiar. She didn't need his name. She knew him by the way he looked at her, not like a stranger, but like a ghost recognizing its echo. Jonah, son of her uncle Reuben. The same boy who once stole her shoes and laughed while she walked barefoot across thorns. The boy who called her dogface in front of dinner guests. Now dressed like a preacher. Like time had somehow made him clean. "I'm here for the girl my kin gave away," he announced, his voice too loud, too sure. Like the words had been practiced in the mirror of a town that never asked hard questions. His eyes found hers across the fire. "You don't belong here, Miriam. Come home." Home. She tasted the word. It crumbled like old bread. Before she could answer, Tahu stood. He stepped beside her, not in front, not shielding her. Just there, a shadow of strength, a wall of silence. But Miriam raised her hand gently to his arm. And he stopped. She didn't need protection. Not from this. Not anymore. She stepped forward. The wind caught her braid, tugged at her skirt, but her spine did not bend. "You mean the home where I was starved and laughed at?" she asked, voice low, but firm as the ground beneath her feet. "Where I was traded like livestock." Jonah shifted in the saddle, his mouth twitching. "That was before. You've made your point, caused a spectacle. We can find a place for you again. A proper one. A proper one," she repeated, her lip curling, not with hate, but with something deeper. Pity. "And what would I be there? A servant in someone's attic? A reminder of shame you all pretended not to see?" Behind her, the Lakota were silent, but present. Not a threat, not a shield, just witness. Tahu didn't speak. He didn't have to. His silence had always been her permission. Jonah frowned. "This life you've made here, it's not Christian." Miriam tilted her head. "This life is honest," she said. "I've been treated with more grace by people who owed me nothing than I ever was by those who shared my blood." Jonah scoffed. "You think this savage has made you a wife?" She didn't flinch. She smiled. Not out of spite, but because, for the first time, she knew exactly who she was. "He didn't make me a wife," she said. "He made me human." The fire cracked. A log shifted, sparks dancing up into the dark. "You think this can't be undone?" Jonah said. "We can undo this mistake." Her voice softened. but it cut deeper than steel. You already did, she whispered, when you gave me away. And with that, she turned, not in anger, not in shame, but in sovereignty. She walked past the fire, past the circle, past the man who once stole her childhood. She did not look back. And Jonah, for all his noise, did not follow. That night, she sat beneath the willow where the stars peeked through. Tahu was there, cross-legged, hands resting on his knees like the earth itself had calmed him. You did not need me, he said softly, but I needed to stand beside you anyway. She leaned into him, her shoulder brushing his. You didn't stand beside me because I was weak, she said. You did it because you saw I was strong. The fire before them burned slow, steady, not wild, not consuming, but warm, lasting, and Miriam, for the first time, felt no shame in her own flame. Not for her anger, not for her voice, not even for the girl she once had to be to survive. Because now, standing in the camp of people who had not bought her, but welcomed her, beside the man who never touched her without invitation, Miriam was no longer the girl they gave away. She was the woman who came back whole. The spring came early that year. Soft rains fell like blessings instead of burdens. The earth, once hard and frozen, turned rich and dark, giving way to wild mint, early shoots of grass, and the sound of birdsong returning to the trees. Miriam, no, not Miriam anymore, Wyaka now, rose each morning not because someone would strike her if she didn't, but because the sun called her gently to rise. No one barked orders. No one sighed when she spoke. No one reminded her of what she had once been. She braided her own hair now, not as a duty to look neat, but as a quiet celebration of hands that no longer trembled. The women showed her new patterns, 3-strand, twist, rope, and she passed them along to the little ones who sat beside her. Curious and eager, children came to her now, not out of obligation, but because they liked her stories, how she could tell about hawks who remembered the wind, or rabbits who whispered to the grass when they were scared. Their giggles were honest. Their eyes held no pity, no suspicion. She was not the traded girl to them. She was the one who carved wooden feathers and tucked them behind their ears when they felt shy. The name had come one morning, quiet as dawn. She'd asked him the night before, her voice low as firelight, fingers tracing the grain of a hawk carving he'd once given her. What would you name me? She said, if it were yours to choose? Tahu didn't answer with words that night, only reached for his carving tools. And when she woke, the next morning, beside her bedroll lay a new piece of ashwood, soft and pale, shaped into a small bird. Not a hawk this time. A dove, wings tucked, resting. He placed it in her hands, his fingers warm and rough. Wyaka, he said, speaking it slowly, letting it settle in the space between them. It means feather, or peace, if spoken the right way. Her throat had gone tight. Why that? Tahu met her eyes, serious as stone. Because you were dropped into the wind, he said, but you did not break. That day, she wore the name like a cloak woven in starlight. Not because it was given to her, but because she chose to keep it. The name from the Bible, Miriam, had always felt like something cold pressed onto her skin. Proper, as her father used to say. Fitting, her stepmother insisted, chosen for her without knowing her. But Wyaka, that name felt like a leaf turning toward the sun. She helped build the new lodge that spring, her hands full of rope and cedar bark. Her laugh no longer something she apologized for. The other women no longer hovered, waiting to see if she belonged. She did, and they knew it. She stitched fur for the winter blankets, taught the little ones how to braid, told stories in the evenings when the fire burned low. When she stood, people made room, not out of obligation, but out of respect. Owanji, the elder woman who had once asked what her name meant, now called her sister, not as a term of pity, but as a declaration. There was no ceremony when she became part of the people. No paper, no bloodline, no declaration from a pulpit. It happened quietly, gently, in the way they asked for her help, in the way they left water near her tent when she had a cough, in the way one child clung to her leg when a storm rolled in, in the way Tahu placed a bowl of stew by her hands each night, not out of duty, but with quiet, constant care. No demands, no conditions, only presence. One evening, as dusk stretched long shadows across the plains, she stood with Tahu beneath the whispering branches of a cottonwood. The wind tugged gently at her sleeves, and the air smelled of sage and turned soil. "You never asked me to stay," she said. He nodded. "I didn't have to." She smiled. "You never made me feel like I had to, either." His eyes met hers. "Because it was never a debt," he said. "Only a choice, one you made every day." And she had, day after day, with every log carried, every stew stirred, every child comforted. She chose this life, this name, this love. That night, she placed the dove carving beside the hawk on her bedroll. 2 pieces of wood, 2 names, not a forgetting of who she had been, but a claiming of who she had become. She was still Miriam somewhere in the story, still the girl who had walked through fire and silence. But now, she was also Wyaka, feather, peace, and maybe most important of all, freedom. Not the loud kind with open gates and roaring crowds, but the kind that lets you laugh without checking who's watching. The kind that lets you rest. The kind that lets you look at your own hands and say, "These hands are mine, and they've built something worth keeping." The summer wind came soft through the grass, whispering promises in a language older than words. It carried the scent of sage and river dust, of fire smoke and earth warmed by sun. Children chased each other between tents. The old ones sang low under their breath as they stirred pots of berries and corn. Somewhere in the distance, a drum beat slow like a steady heart. Wyaka stood barefoot at the edge of the new lodge, the sun warm on her shoulders. She had helped raise each pole, tied every strip of hide with her own hands. Her fingerprints were in the seams, her sweat in the beams. It wasn't grand, it wasn't polished, but it was hers. A home she chose. Not the kind assigned by blood or duty. Not the kind where silence was a shield, and love had to be earned like food. This home had grown from trust, from long silences shared over fire, from laughter in the arms of people who saw her not as a mouth to feed but a voice worth hearing. And Tahu had never asked her to stay. Not once. He had only ever made room for her beside him. And that, she realized, was why she had never wanted to leave. Jonah came again, rode into camp like a dust storm, unwelcome and loud. His clothes were cleaner this time, his face shaved. He looked more like a preacher now than the boy who used to pull her hair and mock her hunger. But his eyes were the same, cold, certain, full of the world he came from, the one that said women belonged only where they were placed. "I've come to take you home," he said, loud enough for the others to hear. Wyaka didn't flinch. She didn't need Tahu to step forward this time. She stepped out of the lodge herself, braid hanging loose over her shoulder, beads around her wrist catching the sunlight like little stars. "You already did," she said, "when you gave me away." Jonah's mouth twitched. "You've made your point, Wyaka," he said, stumbling a little over the name. "But this isn't your life. This isn't where you belong." She walked toward him slowly, calm as dusk. "You're wrong," she said, voice quiet but sure. "This is exactly where I belong. Not because I was taken in, but because I chose to stay." He glanced at Tahu, who stood a few paces back, silent, steady, unshaken. "You think he's made you into something better?" Jonah spat. "He's just playing at being civilized. You're still a cast-off, no matter what name you wear." Wyaka didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "I'm not what was discarded," she said. "I'm what rose from it." Jonah had no reply to that, because there was nothing left to say. She turned her back on him, the same way they once turned theirs on her, and this time. She didn't feel small. She felt free. That evening, the sun dipped low behind the hills, painting the sky with amber and ash. Tahu knelt by the fire, his hands slow and deliberate as he wrapped something in soft buckskin. When she came to sit beside him, he said nothing at first, only held the bundle out with both hands. Like an offering, Wyaka took it gently, opened it. Inside were 2 carvings, one she recognized. The dove, the one he'd given her when she first became Wyaka. But beside it was another. A hawk, wings arched protectively, and the 2 birds were carved so their wings curled into each other. Wood woven like wind over stone. She stared at them. 2 names, 2 truths, 2 halves of a story now told side by side. Her eyes stung. You never asked me to stay. She whispered. You never made me feel I had to. Tahu looked at her, eyes dark with quiet, full of more depth than any sermon she'd ever heard. This was never a debt, he said, only a choice, one you made, every day. She set the carvings down carefully beside the fire and leaned forward, pressing her forehead gently to his. Not out of obligation, not out of need, but because in that moment, she saw all of herself reflected in his stillness. Not what had been taken from her, but what she had reclaimed. They said no vows that night. There were no rings, no altar, no feast carved from silver platters. Only the crackle of flame, the hum of crickets, the distant laughter of children, and two people who chose each other. Quietly, wholly, without ownership, she laid her head against his shoulder, and he wrapped the blanket around them both, not to cover her, but to include himself. They didn't speak. They didn't need to, because real love in the wild places does not shout. It waits, it shelters, it builds, and that was how she knew this was home. Not a house, not a bloodline, but a space carved from kindness, choice, and firelight. She had walked through storms, through hunger, through silence, and shame, and the fire had not consumed her. It had forged her. Wyaka, feather, peace, windborn, was no longer the girl traded like a sack of beans. She was the woman who built her own hearth, with her own hands, and for the first time in her memory, she didn't belong to anyone. She belonged to herself, and she was finally, fully, free.